The officers' club smelled like floor wax and old cigars, and my cousin Samuel was holding court at the long table by the window. He had pinned on lieutenant that afternoon. The bars were still bright on his collar. He had waited his whole life to be exactly this, and he was going to make the room watch him enjoy it. I was 3 stools down at the bar. I had a club soda I had not touched. I was not in uniform. I had come as family in a dark blazer and slacks, which is how the family had always preferred me. Small, quiet, off to the side. The club was busy for a Thursday. Change of command season. There were captains at the far tables and ensigns near the door and a wall of unit patches behind the bar, one of which was mine, though nobody at Samuel's table knew that. The wall of patches is a kind of history. You can read a whole air station off a wall like that if you know how. Samuel did not know how. Samuel had been in the fleet for 11 months. He raised his glass to his own health for the 3rd time. His friends laughed on cue. My Uncle Gordon, his father, sat at the head of the table with the particular glow of a man whose son had turned out exactly the way he had ordered. Gordon had done 20 years himself, enlisted, and retired a senior chief, and he had spent every year since deciding that the family's future wore an officer's collar, and that the collar would be Samuel's. He was not wrong that it would be Samuel's. He was only wrong about whose it already was. Then Samuel found me. "There she is," he said, loud enough to carry. "My cousin Nora. She's Navy too, if you can believe it." The table turned to look, polite, curious, the way people look at a chair that has started talking. "What do you even do out there, cuz?" Samuel said. "Staple things? File things?" A couple of the lieutenants smiled into their drinks. One of them, a woman with a sharp haircut and a sharper watch, did not. She was watching me instead of him. I filed that away without meaning to. I file people. It is a habit from a job where the person next to you may have to save your life. I set my glass down a 1/4 inch. I did not answer. "Come on," he said, warming to it, feeling the table with him. "Every real sailor's got a call sign. Everyone. What's yours?" He grinned at his friends before he grinned at me. "What is it? Barbie? Cupcake?" The table laughed. His whole table laughed with him. Gordon laughed too, a short, satisfied bark, the sound of a man watching the natural order confirm itself one more time. My father's brother, laughing at me across a room 40 years after he started. I had answered harder rooms than this one. Rooms with no floor under them. Rooms lit only by instruments, at night, over water that wanted us dead. I had learned in those rooms that the truth does not need me to raise my voice for it. The truth is very patient. It will wait as long as you make it. It had waited 8 years on me already, so I said it plainly. Phantom. 10 feet away, at the end of the bar, a Navy captain I had not noticed lifted his head. He was in service dress, silver eagles on his shoulders, a glass of water in front of him, and a phone face down beside it. He had been reading something. He was not reading it now. He was looking at me the way you look at a face you last saw on the worst night of your life and never expected to see again in daylight. "Say that again," he said. Samuel kept going, because Samuel did not yet understand that the ground had moved under him. "Phantom," he repeated, and snorted, and looked to his friends to make sure they got it. "Sure, phantom, very scary. Real ghost of the fleet, this one." The captain stood up. He did it without hurry, the way senior men move when a thing matters and they do not want to spill it. His stool scraped back across the wax floor. In a room that size, at that hour, one chair moving is a loud thing. Heads turned toward the sound, then toward him, then slowly, toward me. Then another chair moved. A commander at the next table had turned all the way around in her seat. She was looking at me too now. The lieutenant with the sharp watch, the one who had not laughed, set her drink down very carefully, as if it had become important not to make any more noise than the room was already making. She had understood something a beat ahead of the others. I have seen that too, over the years, the person at the table who reads the weather first. She looked from the standing captain to me and back, and then she stood up as well, and she was junior enough that standing was not required of her by anything but her own good instinct. I liked her for it. Whoever she was, I still do not know her name. I hope she does well. Samuel's grin was still on his face. It had not yet received the message that the afternoon was over. His hand was still half raised from whatever gesture he had been about to make. Some new small cruelty loaded and ready, and it just hung there in the air, unfired, while the room he had been performing for turned its back on the performance and faced the woman he had sent for drinks. Let me tell you who I actually was, standing at that bar in my civilian blazer while my cousin decided my name was a joke. That morning, I had walked the flight line at the Naval Air Station where the reception was being held. It was my flight line. I commanded the rescue squadron based there. On the tarmac, they did not call me Nora, and they did not call me anybody's cousin. They called me Skipper and Commander and Ma'am, and they meant every syllable of it, because I had earned the right to hear them and they knew exactly how. I flew helicopters. Specifically, I flew the kind that go out to bring people back. Combat search and rescue. When an aircraft goes into the water, or a crew goes down behind a ridgeline, or a sailor is swept off a deck at night in weather that grounds everything with sense, somebody has to go and get them, and that somebody has to be very good and slightly unreasonable, because reasonable people stay on the ship. For 19 years, the somebody was often me. I had wings I earned at 24, a squadron I earned at 40, a distinguished flying cross in a drawer at home, face down, because I do not like looking at it, and a call sign I earned in a single night in 2015, and the call sign was not Cupcake. None of that was on my collar in the officers' club, because I had no collar in the officers' club. I had a blazer and a club soda, and 8 years of a story my family told about me that was not true. The story was that I had washed out, that I had gone to flight school, could not hack it, and ended up pushing paper somewhere warm. The story had a comfortable shape. It let everyone off the hook. It let Gordon keep his son at the center of the family sky. It let the cousins have their easy sort, the golden one and the one who could not fly. It let my own quiet count as failure instead of discipline, which suited a family that mistrusted quiet. I want to be honest with you because this is a story about the cost of not being honest. I could have corrected that story any time in 8 years. I did not. I let it stand. I told myself I let it stand because I was tired, and that was true, but it was not the whole truth. Part of me had decided that people who could not be bothered to ask did not deserve the answer. I had turned my own silence into a test they did not know they were failing. That is a kind of pride. It is quieter than Samuel's. It is not one bit better, and it costs more because I paid it instead of him. The distinguished flying cross lives face down in a drawer at home, under a tray of spare buttons and a broken watch. And I want to tell you why, because it says something about the whole 8 years. It is not modesty. Modesty is a performance too, just a quieter one. It is that the medal is a receipt for the worst night of 2 other men's lives, and I do not enjoy being reminded that my best flying is other people's catastrophe. Somebody has to have their worst night for me to have my best one. I have never worked out how to feel clean about that, so I keep the receipt face down, and I do not talk about it. And 8 years ago, that habit of not talking about it met a family that had already decided not to ask, and the 2 habits fit together like a lock and a key, and locked. At the squadron that morning, a chief had caught me signing for a night training hop before the family thing. "Big night for the family, ma'am," he said. He was grinning. He liked me. My crews like me, which took me years to allow. "It's Samuel's night," I told him. And I meant it. I did. I had bought a card. I had signed it warmly. I was glad for the kid in the uncomplicated part of me that was still glad for people. I finished the paperwork, checked the weather for the night cruise out of habit, and drove home to change. I stood in front of the closet a while. The dress uniform was right there. Ribbons, wings, the works. I could have walked into that reception as exactly who I was and let the room sort itself. I put on the blazer instead. I told myself it was Samuel's day, and I did not want to steal it. That was half of it. The other half was 8 years of habit, the reflex of making myself easy to overlook, and I am not going to pretend to you that I saw it clearly at the time. I buttoned the blazer. I drove to the club as a guest. I promised myself in the car that I would keep my head down and let my cousin have his afternoon. I kept that promise longer than he deserved. The contempt was not new. It was older than Samuel's commission. It was older than his voice, honestly, because Gordon had been rehearsing it since Samuel and I were children, and the family first decided which of us was the investment and which was the write-off. Go back to 2016, a family kitchen in the fall. Yellow light, a percolator, the smell of my grandmother's kitchen still in the walls a year after we lost her. I was 31, a lieutenant, home for 4 days between things I could not talk about. My father was alive then, quiet at the counter, peeling an apple in one long strip the way he always did. Gordon was telling a story, because Gordon was always telling a story, and this one was about me. "Not everybody's cut out to fly," he said to the room about me while I stood in the room holding a coffee cup. "No shame in a desk," Nora found her level. "Some of us are the tip of the spear, and some of us keep the lights on, and that's fine. That's a team." I had a letter in my coat pocket that week. A real one, on lined paper, from a rescue swimmer, a young man I had lifted out of the sea 11 months before off a sinking fishing boat that had no business being where it was. He had a daughter now. He had written to tell me her name and to say that she existed, because I had held a hover I was not sure I could hold. He had signed it with a word I did not use in front of my family, a large word, the kind you only earn by accident. I left the letter in the pocket. I let Gordon finish his story. My father looked up from his apple, and for 1 second I thought he might say something, and he looked at me, and I looked at him, and neither of us said it. He went back to the apple. I have thought about that second more than almost any other in my life. I do not blame him. He was a quiet man in a loud family, and he had learned, the same as me, that the quiet ones keep the peace by disappearing a little. I only wish one of us had been braver in that kitchen. It would have cost so little then. It costs everything to buy back later. That was the year the small wrong story hardened into a fact. Facts are what a family repeats. A family. By the next Thanksgiving, nobody was guessing that I had washed out. They knew it. They knew it the way you know the sun comes up, and you do not ask the sun for its paperwork. There was a wedding the year after that. 2017, another cousin's. A big one. 300 people in a hotel ballroom. I flew in on leave, in a good dress, and a woman at the door with a clipboard took one look at me and asked if I was with the catering company, because a caterer had sent extra staff and she was short a name. I was not offended. It was an honest mistake, a busy woman doing a hard job. But I remember what I did next, which was more telling than her mistake. I did not correct her all the way. I said I was a guest, and she apologized and waved me in, and I let it drop there, and I found my seat, which was at a back table with the other people the family did not quite know what to do with, and I sat down in it, and I did not make a single sound about any of it. I had a squadron patch in my luggage upstairs. I had a name that a room of officers would have stood up for. I sat at the back table by the kitchen doors, and I passed the bread. There was a phone call in 2018, a cousin planning a reunion working out the seating. She asked whether I would be, and I am quoting her, around that weekend, or off doing my paperwork thing. I said I would try to make it. I did not say I command aircraft that fly into the places your evening news is afraid to send a reporter. Correcting her would have cost an hour and a small fight and a week of being the family's difficult one, the touchy cousin who could not take a joke. Letting it stand cost nothing that afternoon. It cost a great deal over 8 years. I just paid it in installments so small that I could pretend I was not paying at all. That is how the quiet gets you. Never a bill. Only installments. Here's the thing the family could not see, standing in that bright, loud room. There was a second loaded thing in it, and it had been standing at the rail the whole time, drinking water. His name was Reed Calloway. In 2015, he had been a lieutenant, a weapon systems officer, in the back seat of a strike fighter. In 2026, he was a captain, 4 grades and a lifetime up the ladder from where I had last seen him. I did not notice him when I came in. If I had, I think I would have made an excuse and left, because Reed Calloway was a door into the one night I did not put on for company, the night I do not tell at parties, the night that lives behind a door I keep shut. I learned afterward what he had been doing at that bar. He had flown in for a change of command the next morning, a friend taking a squadron. He had stopped for a glass of water and a quiet half-hour before the hotel. He had watched a lieutenant with new bars needle a woman in a blazer, and he had thought nothing of it, the way you think nothing of whether you are not flying in because officers' clubs are full of loud young men. Then the woman said one word, and Reed Calloway's quiet half-hour ended. I have thought a great deal, since about how close I came to never saying it. If Samuel had asked me anything other than my call sign, I would have deflected, and the evening would have ended the way every family evening ended, and Reed Calloway would have finished his water and gone to his hotel, and we would have missed each other by 10 feet and a single word, the two of us, forever. He would have gone on being a captain who owed his life to a name, and I would have gone on being the cousin who did scheduling, and the drawer at home would have stayed shut. It was that thin. The whole correction of 8 years turned on my cousin, reaching, out of pure cruelty, for the exact word that happened to be the one thing in the room that could not be laughed at. Cruelty is not usually that precise. I do not know what to do with how thin it was. I only know it should frighten us. How much of being known comes down to whether the right person is standing at the rail on the right Thursday. He told me later that he had actually asked the bartender for my name a few minutes before I ever said the call sign. Something in how I sat, he said. Something in how I did not flinch when the boy went at me. He said it reminded him of a voice, a cockpit voice he had heard exactly once, on the worst night of his life, coming through his headset over open ocean after he had already made his peace with not being found. He could not place it. He only felt it, the way you feel a name on the back of your tongue. Then Samuel asked for my call sign as a joke, and I answered, and Reed Calloway placed it all at once, the way a lock turns. Back at the table, the toast was tightening. Gordon had decided the lieutenants should be properly introduced to the family, and the introductions ran the way they always ran. "This is Nora," he said, waving a hand at me like a footnote to a document nobody would read. "My brother's girl. She does scheduling for the Navy. Somebody's got to, right? Keeps the trains running." He chuckled, pleased with the line. "The exciting stuff she leaves to the men. Always did." The woman with the sharp watch looked at me again. Fry, the kind young lieutenant junior grade beside her, shifted in his seat, uncomfortable the way you are uncomfortable when an older man says a thing you know you're supposed to laugh at and cannot quite. He was young enough to still find public cruelty embarrassing. He would learn to laugh through it, or he would grow into a better officer than most of the men teaching him. I did not know yet which. I would find out before the night was over. 2 loaded things in one room, moving toward each other, and nobody at Samuel's table felt the air pressure change. Before the call sign, there was the squeeze. There's always the squeeze. The room presses you back into your old small shape, and it does it so casually that pushing back feels like the overreaction, like you are the one making a scene about nothing. The reception was in full swing now. The bar was 3 deep. Samuel was several drinks into being a lieutenant and had discovered that a celebration in his honor ran, in practice, on other people fetching things for him. "Cuz!" he called down the bar, and then he snapped his fingers, actually snapped them, twice, the way you would at a slow waiter. "Grab the next round? You're closest to useful over there." His friends laughed. It was a good line in the room's currency, closest to useful. I heard a couple of the lieutenants repeat it to each other, delighted. I have flown into weather that would have folded Samuel Vandell in half and left him crying for his mother on the cabin floor. I have held a hover over a pitching deck at night with the aircraft shaking and every warning tone it owns going off at once, while a rescue swimmer went down a cable into black water and came back up with a man who could no longer hold on to him, and I have flown all of us home and then walked behind the hangar and been quietly, thoroughly sick where my crew could not see, and then washed my face and signed the maintenance forms. I know precisely how useful I am. I have a very good sense of my own weight. I went and got the round. I want you to understand why, because it matters for the rest. I did not get the round because I was afraid of Samuel. There is nothing Samuel could do to me. I got it because I had made a promise in the car that this was his day, and because a part of me still believed, at 41, that keeping the peace was the same as keeping my dignity. It is not. I know that now. Dignity is not the absence of trouble. Dignity is sometimes the trouble itself, walked into on purpose. But I did not walk into it yet. I picked up my cousin's drink order like a runner. At the bar, waiting on the pour, Fry drifted over, the kind one. "You Navy too, ma'am?" he asked. Friendly, just filling the quiet. "Yes," I said. That was all. I left it there, the way I always did. I did not say, "I am the commander of the squadron whose patch is hanging on that wall right behind your head." I did not say, "I have more flight hours in bad weather than everyone at that table has combined." I picked up the tray. My hands were steady. My hands are always steady. It is the one thing 8 years of swallowing it never managed to take from me. You can take a lot from a person and never touch the hands if the hands were trained by fear a long time ago. "You seem like you know your way around," Fry said, almost to himself, watching me balance the tray without looking at it. "Old habit," I said. There was a second thing at the bar, while I waited, that I have not told you yet. A lieutenant commander I did not recognize came in from outside, shaking rain off his cover, and he saw me, and something crossed his face. And he almost said something. I watched him decide he was wrong. He was not wrong. He had probably seen me at a distance on the flight line in a flight suit, being called skipper, and now here I was in a blazer carrying drinks, and the two pictures would not sit together in his head. So he let the wrong one win, because the wrong one was simpler, the way the wrong picture usually is. He nodded at me the way you nod at staff and went to find his friends. I understood it. I had spent 8 years teaching people to let the wrong picture win. I was good at it by then. I was a professional. I carried the round back to a table of men who thought I was the help and set it down, and Samuel did not say thank you, and I told myself one more time that it did not matter. It was the last time that night I would tell myself that. Then came the moment I decided it did matter. It was not anger. I want to be precise about that because I know the kind of stories that get told, and I know the appetite for rage in them. It was not rage, it was fatigue. A specific, bone-deep, 8-year fatigue with being the small story in every room my family stood in. Rage is hot and it burns off. What I felt was cold, and it had been there so long I had stopped noticing it, the way you stop noticing a sound that never stops. Samuel asked for my call sign to be cruel and to make the table laugh, and to be the biggest man in a room he had rented for the afternoon with his new bars. He fully expected me to deflect. That was the whole game. He would ask, I would go pink and mumble that I did not really have one, and the table would laugh, and the natural order would be confirmed, and we would all go home and do it again next year. Standing there, I understood that I had two choices, and that I had been choosing the wrong one for 8 years without ever quite deciding to. I could keep lying by leaving things out. Silence is a lie when you know the truth and let a false one stand in its place. Or I could tell the truth, plainly, once, and let it cost exactly what it cost, whatever that turned out to be. I thought about the letter in my old coat pocket, the one I never showed anyone. I thought about the rescue swimmer's daughter, who was 10 years old now and did not know my name, which was correct because she should never have to carry the weight of it. I thought about how many true things I had swallowed to keep other people's rooms comfortable, and I did the arithmetic on 8 more years of it, and the number was too large. And then I ran the checklist, the one I run before every hard thing, the one that has kept me alive when my body wanted to panic. Airspeed. Altitude. Attitude. Say the word, fly the aircraft. You do the next correct thing, and then the next one, and you do not let the size of the whole emergency into the cockpit with you. Because it will not fit, and it will not help. There's a thing that happens in a cockpit when you finally commit to the hard approach. Everything gets quiet and very slow and very clear. The noise does not stop, but you stop hearing it. Your hands know what to do, and your voice comes out level, and the fear is still there, but it has been moved into a back room where it cannot reach the controls. That happened to me on a bar stool in an officers' club, the same as it had happened over the water. The room went quiet and slow and clear. My hands were steady. My voice, when it came, was level. I turned on the stool to face my cousin. "You want my call sign?" I said. "That's the joke, yeah?" Samuel said, delighted, sure he had me, playing to the table. "Hit me. What do they call you out there at the desk?" "Phantom," I said. I did not say it loud. I did not need to. Reed Calloway said the rest, and Reed Calloway had a voice that carried, because he had spent 20 years learning to be heard over engines. He had crossed half the distance to me already, water glass forgotten on the bar behind him, and now he stopped a few feet off, and every eye at Samuel's table finally followed a movement that was not Samuel's. "Phantom," Calloway said. His voice was not steady the way mine was. That surprised me. He was a captain. Captains are steady for a living. 2015, the night off the coast, the Hornet that went into the water in the storm, when the ceiling was on the deck and every rescue asset in the strike group was down for weather and the flag had already called it. He stopped. He breathed once. "You came out over the water for us that night, when they had already said we were gone. That was you." The room had gone quiet in pieces, table by table, the way a tide goes out. You do not see it go. You just look up and the water is somewhere else. "Sir," I said. It was. I should tell you what he was not saying, so you understand why the room did what it did next, because otherwise it will sound like a movie, and it was not a movie. It was just the truth, arriving late. That night in 2015, a hornet had gone into the sea after dark in a storm that had grounded everything with a rotor or a wing. 2 aircrew in the water. The seas were past the numbers, well past, the numbers we are allowed to fly rescue inside of, the numbers that exist, because past them, the aircraft starts making the decisions instead of the pilot. The book said no. The strike group commander said no, and he was right to say it. That is what I want you to hear. He was not a coward. He was doing his job, which is to not lose a second aircraft, chasing a first. 19 people on 19 radios said the crew in the water could not be reached before the cold, and the sea took them, and they were not wrong. They were only early. I flew anyway. I will not dress it up for you. I looked at the weather, and I looked at my crew, and I asked them the question you are only allowed to ask volunteers. And they gave me the answer, and we launched into a night that had no right to give anything back. I flew blacked out, on instruments, into a hole in the weather that I had no business trusting would still be there when I arrived. My crew put a swimmer into that water on a cable, into 30-foot seas in the dark, which is the bravest thing I have ever watched a human being do, and I have watched a great deal. And we came off the top of a wave that was trying to bury all of us with 2 men who were not going to last another 20 minutes. One of the 2 was a lieutenant named Reed Calloway. He had stopped kicking by the time we got the cable to him. He told me years later, standing on a terrace, that he had already been saying goodbye to his wife in his head, working out the words, when the light came down through the rain. I have not told you about my crew, and I should, because the story gets told as if it were mine, and it was not mine, it was theirs. 4 of us in a shaking aircraft, and only 1 of us up front. There was a co-pilot beside me, a lieutenant junior grade on his 3rd month in the fleet, who ran the numbers I could not spare attention for, and never once let his voice climb, and I have flown with a great many people, and I remember his composure that night above almost anyone's. There was a crew chief in the back on the hoist, reading the seas in the door, calling the swells, timing the whole recovery to water that was trying to lie to him. And there was the rescue swimmer, who I will not name because he asked me long ago never to, who unclipped from a warm, dry aircraft and went down a wire into 30 feet of black moving water in the dark to put his own hands on 2 men he had never met. I flew the aircraft. That is all I did. I held one position in the sky longer than the aircraft wanted to hold it. Everything that actually saved those men happened behind me and below me, on a cable, in the water, done by people whose names are not in any story. And when a room stands up for Phantom, it is standing for them and does not know it, and I let it, because they would rather not be seen, the same as me. That is the truth of the night under the truth of the night. That is where the name came from. A pilot from the strike group, watching the tapes afterward, said on the net that whoever got in there had to be a ghost, because no living aircraft should have made that approach and come home. It stuck the way the true ones stick. Phantom. I never asked for it. You do not get to pick your call sign. That is the point of it. Somebody else decides what you are, from the outside, based on what you did, and you carry it. Down the bar, a master chief with a chest full of ribbons had come to his feet. Ortega, his nameplate would have said, if I had been close enough, but I did not need it. I did not know the man. He knew the story. Everyone in naval aviation knew the story. It is the kind of story that gets told in ready rooms at midnight to remind the young ones what the job can ask and what a person can answer. That's Phantom, Ortega said. Not to me, to the room. In the flat, certain voice of a man stating a fact that requires no help from anyone. 19 souls on the net said she couldn't get in there. She got in there, brought 2 out of the water in a storm the rest of us couldn't launch into. He was not being dramatic. Chiefs are not dramatic. He was correcting a record, out loud, because a record was being corrected and he wanted to be on the right side of it. Then the chairs went back all along the bar. Not on a command. Nobody called the room to attention. It was not that kind of moment. It was quieter than that, and it was bigger than that. Officers stood the way people stand when something passes that they respect and did not expect to see. A commander, 2 lieutenant commanders, a pair of ensigns near the door who did not know exactly what they were standing for, only that everyone senior to them in the room had stood, and so they stood too, which is how the young learn what matters, by watching where the room puts its feet. The captain stood closest of all, because he was the reason the story existed at all. Samuel had stopped smiling somewhere in there. He was looking at me the way you look at a stranger you have wronged, which, in that second, was exactly what I was to him. He had known me his whole life, and he had never once met me. Now the whole room was meeting me at the same time, and he was watching it happen from the wrong side of it, holding a drink I had brought him. The fallout moved through the room like weather across a field. You could watch it go. Gordon found me first. He came off the head of the table with the color gone out of his face and the certainty gone out of his walk, which I had never once seen, not in 40 years. He was 63 years old, and he had spent most of those years absolutely sure of a thing that had just been taken away from him in front of a room full of strangers in uniform, the very people whose respect he had built his whole self-image on having earned. "You never said," he told me. It came out almost like an accusation, because a man like Gordon needs the fault to land somewhere that is not himself, and quickly, before it can settle. "You never asked, Uncle Gordon," I said. I was not cruel about it. I did not raise my voice. I was just finished being quiet, and being finished has a sound, even when it is gentle. For 8 years I let you tell it wrong, because correcting you was more trouble to me than it was worth. That part is on me, and I own it. But you told a story about me for 8 years, and you never once asked me whether it was true. Not once. You didn't want it to be a question. It was more comfortable as an answer. He did not have anything for that. He opened his mouth and closed it, and behind him the room was still mostly on its feet. And the sight of all those standing officers seemed to add another decade to him where he stood. A senior chief knows exactly what a room of officers rising means. He had spent his career reading it. He was reading it now, and it was not for his son. Samuel came next, and Samuel was worse to watch, because Samuel was young, and the ground had gone out from under the only version of himself he had ever been given to stand on. He came and stood in front of me with his new bars, catching the light, and no idea at all what to do with his hands. "I sent you for drinks," he said. It was not really to me. It was the sound of a man hearing his own afternoon played back to him at full volume. "I sent you for drinks." I snapped my fingers. I called you closest to useful. I asked if your call sign was cupcake in front of everyone on purpose, to be big. "You did," I said. "The hornet in the storm." He said it slowly, like a man checking a sum he already knows will not come out in his favor. We studied that one at the schoolhouse. A whole afternoon on it. They used it to teach us about command decisions and acceptable risk and the difference between a rule and a reason. The instructor said the pilot who launched should either be court-martialed or given a medal, and that the Navy had, and I quote him, done both. He looked like he might be sick on the wax floor. "That was you. That was my cousin Nora, and I sent you for a round of drinks." "Say something," he said, when I did not. "Tell me I'm not as bad as I feel right now. You're supposed to. Family's supposed to." "I'm not going to do that," I said. Gently, but I said it. "You're exactly as bad as you feel right now, and the feeling is doing its job, and if I take it away from you to make this moment easier, I steal the only useful thing that has happened to you today. Sit in it, it will not kill you. I have sat in worse, for longer, and I am still here." He took that better than I expected. Something in him had already decided to be teachable, which is rarer than courage, and more useful. He looked at the drink in his hand, the one I had brought him, and he set it down on the bar like it had become too heavy, and he did not pick it up again. I did not rescue him from it. That is a thing I have learned, out on the water and off it. You do not always reach for the man who is drowning in something he did to himself. Sometimes the water is the whole lesson, and pulling him out early just means he has to go back in later to learn it. I let Samuel stand in his. Around us, the party had rearranged itself around a fact it could not unknow. Fry, the kind lieutenant junior grade, was standing very straight, straighter than the moment strictly required, and looking at me with an expression I recognized, because I had worn it myself once at 22 in front of an instructor I had spent a week underestimating and one afternoon learning to fear. It is the face of a young officer discovering that rank on a collar and worth in a person are two entirely separate measurements, and that the second one does not come with an announcement, and that you had better learn to read for it, or you will spend your career saluting the wrong things. Later I stood out on the club terrace with a glass of water, and Reed Calloway came out and stood beside me, and for a while neither of us said anything. The air station was quiet at that hour. You could hear the windsock lines ticking against their poles out on the field, and a single aircraft somewhere in the pattern, and under it all the sea, which I can hear anywhere, whether it is there or not. They didn't know, he finally said. It was not quite a question. Your family, they didn't know any of it. Not the cross, not the squadron, not the night, nothing. No, I said. How is that possible? He was not angry. He was bewildered, the honest bewilderment of a man looking at a wound that did not have to happen and cannot understand the shape of it. You have a distinguished flying cross, you command a squadron, you are, and I am not exaggerating for the terrace, a story they tell at the schoolhouse. How does a family not know that? Because I never told them, I said. And that part is on me every bit as much as it is on them. He was quiet a moment. Out on the field, a tug was moving something heavy, slow, its light sweeping the dark in a long arc. My wife knows your name, he said. Did you know that? Not your real name, she never had that. But she knows there was a helicopter and a woman flying it, and that the woman is the reason there was a funeral we did not have to hold. She has prayed for you by the wrong name for 11 years, Phantom. She thanks a ghost every year on the date. He laughed, but it did not have much in it. I am going to have to call her tonight and give her a real one. Nora, she's going to cry. I want you to be ready for the possibility that a stranger in another time zone is going to cry about you before midnight, because you finally, at a bar, told your idiot cousin the truth. I did not have anything for that. I am not the sort who cries easily. It was trained out of me young, and then trained further out of me later. But I had to look out at the field for a while. He turned and looked at me then. Really looked, the way he had not been able to in the water in 2015, when it was black and loud and he was most of the way gone. You saved my life, he said. My daughter is 8 years old. She exists. She has a name. She lost a tooth last week. Because you flew into a night you had no business surviving and held a hover no one else would launch to attempt. And your uncle thinks you do scheduling. He did, I said. Past tense now, I think, as of about 20 minutes ago. Calloway shook his head slowly. He did not understand it, and I did not expect him to, and I did not try to make him. He came from a family that had asked. You can always tell. Not everyone does, and the ones who did not come out of one cannot quite believe the ones who did. And the reverse is just as true. When he went back inside, I stayed out a while longer by myself, and I let myself feel the whole shape of it, which I had been too disciplined to feel in the room with everyone watching. Here is the shape, and it is not the shape you would expect. I had been right, at that bar, in front of everyone, completely and publicly right, and being right had felt like almost nothing at all. There was no rush in it, because the win was not the win I had actually wanted for 8 years. The win I wanted was old and could not be collected anymore. I wanted my father to have looked up from his apple in that kitchen in 2016 and known, and said so. I wanted Gordon to have asked me, one single time out of love, instead of telling the room out of pride. I wanted to have been known by the people who were supposed to know me in the ordinary years, at the ordinary dinners, and no room full of standing strangers could hand me that, because that particular thing was already spent. It had been spent a little every year for 8 years, and there was none of it left to collect at a bar. The truth had surfaced. It does. It always does, in the end, on a day you do not get to choose, in a room you did not pick. But it surfaces later than it should have, almost always, and the years in between do not come back, and no reckoning gives them back to you, no matter how many chairs go scraping backward across a floor. I decided, standing on that terrace with the sea in my ears, that the silence ended for good that night. Not with anger, with plain speech from then on, to whoever asked and to some who did not, whatever it cost me. I had finally learned the true price of the quiet. I did not want to keep paying it in installments for another 8 years and find myself at 49 having handed away that much more. Samuel found me on the terrace before I left. I want to tell you he came out to save face because that is the easier story and it is probably the one you are bracing for. He did not. He came out with his uniform jacket off, over his arm, and his new bars in his closed hand, which is a strange and vulnerable thing for a young officer to do on the day he earns them, and he sat down on the low wall, a careful distance from me, the way you sit near someone you are genuinely not sure will let you sit at all. Tell me about the water, he said. Samuel. Not the rooms version, not the schoolhouse version with the slides. His voice went thin on it, and he let it, which took something. I've had the rooms version of everything my whole life. Everybody's version of everything, handed to me, pre-decided. I want the real one, from you. Once, if once is all you'll give me. I'll take once. And that, I will tell you, is the moment the whole night turned into something better than a reckoning. Because a reckoning is just a room standing up. It feels enormous and it changes very little. What Samuel did on that wall was harder than anything the room did. He set down the version of himself that had needed me to be less, set it right down like the jacket over his arm, and he asked to be shown the true thing. Knowing it would cost him the comfortable picture he had lived inside since he was a boy, small enough to sit on his father's shoulders at an air show and be told that the sky belonged to men like them. That is not nothing. In some ways it is braver than the storm was. The storm did not require me to admit I had been wrong about myself for 28 years. It only required me to fly. "Sit down properly, Lieutenant," I said. Not unkindly. There was even something in it that was almost warm, the first warm thing I had felt toward that boy in a long time. "I'll tell you once." So I told him. The ceiling that was down on the deck, the book that said no, and the flag that said no, and the 19 voices on the net that said no, and how none of them were cowards, which is the part he needed most and would not have gotten from any slide. The hole in the weather I had no earthly right to trust. The swimmer going down the cable into the black, which is the real heroism of that night, and mine is a footnote to his. The 2 men, the one who had stopped kicking. I told him the parts that are in no schoolhouse presentation, the smell of the cabin, the sound an airframe makes when it is being asked for more than it has, the specific wordless prayer you say that is not really made of words, the being sick afterward behind the hangar where the crew could not see. I did not perform it for him. I have never told it to perform. I told it to him straight, the way I would tell it to a new pilot who needed to understand what the job could ask, and he listened to the whole thing without once, not one single time, turning it back around to himself. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Out on the field, the aircraft in the pattern finally landed. You could hear it touch. "I've spent my whole life," he said at last, being handed a place at the front of the family, the good chair, the first plate, and you earned an actual one, out there, in the dark, over the water, and then you let us hand your place to me anyway. He turned his bars over in his hand. "Why would you do that? I don't understand why you'd let us." "Because it was easier," I said. "For a while." And then easier became a habit, and a habit became a lie I was too proud to correct, because correcting it meant admitting I'd let it run that long. Don't do the version of that you were going to be tempted to do, Samuel. And you will be tempted. Whatever your version turns out to be. Don't let the small, easy story about a person stand just because fixing it is work and the work is uncomfortable and no one is making you. That is the whole thing I have to teach you, and it took me 41 years and a bad afternoon to learn it well enough to say out loud. "Did Dad know?" he asked then, very quietly. "Your father, my uncle, did he ever know?" It was a good question and a kind one, and it told me the boy was already thinking about the right things, about the years and who was inside them. "No," I said. "He almost did once in a kitchen. I think he wanted to ask me and did not know how. He was a quiet man in a loud family, same as I turned out to be. We recognized each other and neither of us said so, which is a sad thing for 2 people who loved each other to have managed. I let that sit. So no, he never knew. And that is the one I do not get back, Samuel. Your father, I can still tell. You I am telling right now. But my father died thinking his daughter could not do the thing his daughter was better at than almost anyone alive, and I let him, to keep the peace at a counter over an apple. Do not do that one. Of all of them, do not do that one. Peace is not worth that. I promise you it is not, and I paid full price to be able to promise it. He nodded. He looked at the bars in his hand for a while, and then, instead of pinning them back on his collar, he put them in his trouser pocket and buttoned it. And I understood exactly what he meant by it. And I did not say anything, because some things a young man has to mean in private. It has been a few weeks now. I want to be honest about what changed and what did not, because I do not trust the stories where everyone transforms overnight and the family becomes wonderful in a single scene. That is not how families work, and you know it as well as I do. The family did not become people who ask. Gordon did not wake up curious after 63 years of being certain. But the story changed, which is more than I let myself expect. Gordon called me once, and it was stiff and hard, and it cost him visibly, even down a phone line. And he did not really apologize, because Gordon does not have the equipment for an apology and never had it installed. But he asked me a question about my squadron, an actual question. And then he was quiet, and he let me answer the whole of it without interrupting, to relocate the story back to Samuel. For Gordon, that silence was a kind of kneeling. I recognized it. I told him more than the question asked for, because you reward the asking when it finally comes, even late, even clumsy, especially late. Samuel calls now. Not to perform anything and not to make anything up to me, which would have been just another way of making it about him. He just calls. He asks how the flying is. He asks real questions and then waits for the real answers, which is a skill he did not have 11 weeks ago and is teaching himself in a hurry. Sometimes he calls me Phantom, but only ever as a joke he has actually earned the right to make now, which is a completely different object from the joke he made at that bar, though it is built out of the same word. Mostly, though, he just uses my name, Nora. And it turns out that is all I ever wanted from any of them, the whole time, under everything. My own name said by someone who knows what it means and what it cost, with no punchline hung off the end of it. He defends the true version now, too, which is the part that told me it was real and not just guilt-wearing manners. A cousin repeated the old washed-out line at a barbecue a couple of weekends ago, out of nothing but pure worn habit, the way you reach for a light switch in a house you used to live in. And before I could decide whether it was even worth the trouble, I heard Samuel correct her. Flatly. Without any drama, which is the tell, because drama would have been for the room and this was not for the room. She commands a rescue squadron, he said. She has a distinguished flying cross. She pulled 2 aircrew out of the ocean in a storm the whole strike group was grounded in. Ask her about it sometime if she'll tell you, and don't be surprised if she won't. Then he changed the subject because he has already learned the last part, which is that the correction does not need to be a performance either. You just say the true thing, plainly, and let it stand, and move on, and let the truth do its own quiet work, which it will, because it is patient, and it was always going to win in the end. The only question was ever how many years you were going to make it wait. There is one more small thing, and I keep it because it matters more to me than the room standing. A few days after the club, a card came in the mail, an actual card from the young lieutenant with the sharp watch, the one who read the weather first and stood before she had to. She had gotten my name from someone, and my address from someone else, which took effort. Inside she had written only one line. It said that she had joined the Navy to become someone a room stands up for, and that watching me, she had understood, for the first time, that the standing is not the point, and that she was going to spend her career trying to be the kind of officer people did not have to stand up to recognize. She signed it with her name, which I now know and will keep to myself. I have flown into a storm for strangers. That card undid me more than the storm ever did. I have it in the drawer now, on top of the metal, face up where the metal is face down. That tells you the order of things, if you were wondering about the order of things. 2 cousins on honest ground. It took 28 years and 1 bad joke in an officers' club to get us there. I would rather it had taken less. I would rather it had taken none of it. But I will take honest ground however late it arrives and however hard the arriving was, because the alternative is the quiet, and I know exactly what the quiet costs now. I have the receipts. I paid every one of them. So let me talk to you now, whoever you are, if you have stayed with me all the way to here. Maybe you are someone who has let people carry a wrong, small version of you. Maybe correcting it always felt like too much. Too much work, too much conflict, too much like begging to be seen by the very people who were supposed to see you without being asked, without being made to. I understand that better than I know how to say. I lived inside that exact choice for 8 years, and I told myself the whole way through that it was dignity, when the truth is that a great deal of it was only tiredness wearing dignity's coat and hoping no one would check the label. Here's the one true thing that night on the terrace left me with, and I am going to say it plainly, because plainly is the only way I say things now. The truth about you will surface. It always does, in the end. But it surfaces on a day you do not get to choose, in a room you did not pick, and almost always years later than it should have. And the time in between does not come back to you. Not for a medal, not for a room full of officers on their feet, not for anything. The people who love you can only meet the real you if you let them meet you, in the ordinary years, at the ordinary tables, and you cannot save it all up for some future room full of strangers who will stand for you at a bar. Strangers standing is a fine thing. It is not the thing. The thing is being known by your own in time. My cousin asked for my call sign as a joke. Phantom. That was me. It was always me. And the only part I would change out of the whole long night is that I would have said so, out loud, plainly, at my own family's table, a great many years before a room full of strangers had to stand up and say it for me.